mentally ill, and so they realize, you know, it's a problem and contribute to doing it. It's the Kennedy family in the Special Olympics, because one of President Kennedy's, one of the sisters was at that time she was mentally retarded, now she'd be developmentally disabled, but you know, was shut away for years because that's what they did, and so the family started that. But I think there's a role and a need, because that's really you got a lot of mentally ill people going around. That's a societal problem. That's my judgment.
In the context of the shooting in Tucson, certainly there's, I think, a lot of common ground among all different groups to ensure that those individuals who are mentally incompetent do not have access to firearms. I mean, that is the law. The question and the problem, we saw this in the immediate aftermath a couple of years ago, the shooting at Virginia Tech as well. How do you determine that, first of all? I mean, just because somebody, you know, puts some weird blogs or emails out there, you know, certainly is not the end of the matter. All of us probably get weird emails and weird blogs, and that doesn't mean the person is mentally incompetent and ought to have a constitutionally guaranteed right taken away from them. Part of it, though, is doing a better job of ensuring that the records are maintained, the records are kept, the records are shared properly among different governmental entities at all levels, not just ATF, but your local governments, your local court systems, and so forth, and devoting the proper tax resources to ensure that those records are maintained and kept and shared and accessible by law enforcement, so that people who do have, as the shooter in Virginia Tech clearly did, have a demonstrated, verifiable mental problem and should not have had access to the firearms. So we have a lot of work to do in that area, to define it properly, to take the steps and devote the resources to making sure the records are properly maintained and shared and accessible. But you know, it's not determining who is mentally incompetent. It's not an easy question, and it needs a lot more attention than we've given it. And you know, the tragedy, as you say, in Tucson pointed that out. We need to do a better job.
What you got?
Well, my question was, there seems to have been, since the Clinton administration continuing through the George Bush administration, a progressive deregulation of the financial markets and the deregulation of the securities markets, which seems to have had in 2008, you know, what some would have said were inevitable, you know, catastrophic consequences. On the one hand, I know that the Libertarian position is generally, you know, non-regulatory, you know, as a doctrine, and yet, without question, you know, Wall Street is populated by people who have no ethics, you know, and would do anything to make money. What is the place of government regulation in regulating such people? And by regulating, I mean not just holding them responsible after they cheat and making them give back 10% of what they've stolen, you know, but keeping it from happening in the first place. Do you think government has a place in such regulation?
Well, I mean, I think they do, and it did start with Robert Rubin, Clinton's secretary, and the great Phil Graham, who took George Mahon's place. But, you know, they changed the law that had been there for years, that had worked pretty well. And then, of course, Rubin, no cause and effect, but he's making $105 million at Citicorp or Citibank now. And the same people from Goldman Sachs and whatever, they were in Bush II's administration. They were in Obama's administration. I mean, Larry Summers, I mean, these other people. And I think that it used to be in the Army, and they probably still tell you, what was it? A pass is a privilege and leave was a right. I think so. You had Yeah, so in theory, it's a privilege to drive, so you gotta take a license that show you know how to drive. It should be a privilege to handle other people's money, and so therefore, you ought to be willing to suffer from some regulations. And I'll tell you, I know a lot of stockbrokers, and they weren't making, you know, like 11 billion like that short seller did, but they were making pretty good money before any of this happened. And I think that it just, I mean, I'm kind of in favor of regulation. I think deregulation, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense, but in a lot of ways, the people running the businesses always know a little bit more than the customers in whatever, you know, whether it's trucking, whether it's financial. But yeah, I think very strongly, and I think the bill that they passed, Barney Frank and whoever, Chris Dodd, I mean, first of all, a lot of that shit happened on their watch. But the other thing is the lobbies that they have and those people, and unfortunately, and I don't know if Bob agreed, but, and you can't stop it, but nobody can tell me, who spent like too many years in public office, that money doesn't influence policy to a big degree or sometimes a small degree. But that's why I do have a great fondness for true conservatives and for libertarians, because they really vote how they believe, they talk how they believe, and, you know, they aren't walking around looking for somebody to show up at their next fundraiser, or even if somebody does show up, they haven't, you know, quote,